Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Thanks, sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Topps, Upper Deck, and Panini. Defending PSA. Not that they need to be defended, but there's been a lot of discussion about PSA's upcharges lately, and I just thought, I'm going to give my unique perspective. I competed against PSA, and I have the perspective of a grading company, at this point now, former owner. It's an explanation of what I think is going on here, and it's given me some very illuminating hindsight working through this. Back before PSA, before BGS, in the very early days of my price guides, back in the late 70s even, I personally helped shape the verbiage of the meanings of the descriptive grades, what it means to be excellent or mint or very good or poor or fair. Before there were numbers, there were words. And before I massaged the words, there had been different attempts. I synthesized them to some degree to be consistent. That's pretty much what has been accepted, and yet the numbers are the big deal now. 6.5, I don't even know what that is in words, but I know what it is in a number. Throughout this, I just want to say I've got respect for Joe Orlando, Nat Turner, the current and previous regimes of PSA. They do an awful lot of things right. Okay, here's the punchline. Part of PSA's edge, perhaps even a big part of PSA's edge, is their upcharge. It has just dawned on me. They're not just getting away with it grudgingly. They're making a defiant statement that we are the best, we are worth it, and we're charging more because our cards are worth more. I've been saying that when we got started, we had a disadvantage because they had the registry and that was their secret sauce. And we had trouble because first mover advantage for the registry was a big deal. But now I can see that it may be just as important or more was this upcharge. It wasn't even that subtle, but it was a subtle movement toward positioning their brand, PSA, for higher secondary market values. I'm now saying it's their second big edge they had on us when we got started, because we didn't do that. We thought people won't like that. They don't like that, but they do like having higher secondary market values. For example, let's just talk about five-figure cards, 10,000 and up. If you had the same card, if it's a PSA 9 of that card, it's going to be offered at a higher price by a dealer than a BGS 9 of that same card because of what I think is a fallacy. It's a subtle fallacy of what do I have in it? I have more in the PSA 9. I have the cost of the card plus the cost of the grading plus the upcharge. So you can get upcharged and deep down make sure I'm not going to sell it for the same price. I have more in it. Again, I don't agree with it, but that is what people are implicitly thinking. It's just a built-in psychological justification for higher secondary market prices and values. I look back, I think, wow, because I think like a collector. At that point, I was thinking, gee, collectors won't like that. If you upcharge them, I've heard all the arguments. But the bottom line now, looking back, is it's caused people, and they haven't even done this math sometimes, the real question when you're submitting a card to BGS or PSA or anywhere, is the grading charge worth it? And with PSA, additionally, is the grading charge worth it with the upcharge? And then you can get into the time value, overnight service as opposed to a 3-month service. How important is it for you to get it back in terms of maybe the fluctuating value of the card? But everybody should be doing that math. I've got a card, I want to grade it, I want to get it authenticated. And whether you want to collect it or flip it, you ought to do the math to say, here's what's going to cost to grade from this service, and here's the secondary market. So if you're going to pay an upcharge of $100, but it's a $200 greater value in the secondary market price, then it's worth doing. So if PSA would not be able to do this unless it's working. So it's working enough, but if enough people say, I'm going to question that, that may not always be the case. So every time you complain against the PSA upcharge, I'm saying counterinstinctively, I think it's a boost to their brand. Now the submitters get mad, but what do? They tell the world. It's free PR that is another reinforcement that PSA sells for more. Otherwise, nobody would be going to PSA to pay more unless they're paying more to think that deep down, to justify that decision, they're going to get more when they sell it. And so they're going to price it for more. And so there's never going to be a change, everybody, unless submitters go elsewhere, because the math is working for PSA and it's working for submitters. Our company, Beckett, we were very successful and in many years very profitable. However, PSA is even more profitable and more successful than we were. So I shouldn't be surprised, and you shouldn't be surprised, that in my day, people were always trying to tell me how to run my business, our business, and how to price our services. And now they're trying to do the same thing with PSA. But I'm telling you, PSA is humming. They are doing really well. They could be a Harvard Business School case study on how they have structured their business in a highly, hugely successful way. It's not that I'm jealous. I did fine, but they have done great. Other criticisms that maybe they need defending is a lack of consistency or a lack of transparency. I look at it as not inconsistency, but mistakes. And I look at the mistakes as being part of two things. One is training. We spend a lot of time trying to train people in our system and to be able to grade accurately. But the other thing that's not talked about that much is that you can know how to grade a card, a generic card, but I think you need some familiarity with particular cards. So if you've not graded a certain type of card, you don't know what the natural centering is or the natural cutting, depending on the vintage of the card and all that stuff. Inconsistency, collectors have figured out a way. They can criticize PSA for that. And what do? They bring it back to get it regraded. And if it's a mistake, same thing. They're going to say that's a mistake, and maybe PSA will fix their mistakes. In fact, their guarantee is about mistakes they've made. People are more concerned with fairness than transparency, and they're more concerned with mistakes not enduring and living on. Back in the day when we started, PSA was the dealer's and the auctioneer's choice, and BGS became the people's choice, and that was good. But again, it was based on the way we approached business and the business. I hear a lot about pop control. I'm not buying it. We didn't do pop control when I was at BGS. The control is standards control or reputation or brand control. Effectively, it looks like pop control. If somebody shows up with a very nice, potentially PSA 10 O-Pee-Chee Gretzky rookie, that card is going to be greatly scrutinized. And it's not because, we don't want to give another PSA 10. No, I think they'd love to give another PSA 10 if it warrants it. But the problem is it's going to be more greatly scrutinized. And I'm just telling you, as a former grading company owner, greater scrutiny leads to lower grades, not higher grades. The more you look at the card, the more you're looking for flaws and potentially finding some, the more magnification. And I think grading standards tend to get tighter as time goes on, and grades get lower as the prices for the cards and the prices for the grading increase. Then they're spending more time on it. More time, more technology, more eyes, more training, more supervision, more experience. That leads to lower grades because they're able to see the flaws. You can't even get hired unless you can see the flaws. And most people can't see small flaws. I'm not talking about nano microscopic flaws. I'm talking about flaws that can be seen. And once a flaw is pointed out, you can't unsee it. So if 2 or 3 people are looking at a big card, they're liable to find something and they all can see it. Yep. And then you've got to downgrade it, because the concern here starts out being, I don't like it if PSA is too strict. I don't like it if they're too lenient. Wait a minute, they do like it if they're too lenient, but the too lenient is the more serious error for PSA. If they give higher grades than are warranted, and people would say they're doing that just to get upcharges, that'd be foolish, because it can really seriously lead to expensive guarantee claims if they are messing up. Again, a mistake, not a slight overgrade, but they miss something. Missing a big flaw can really trigger the guarantee, and that's really what you're getting those different eyes on sometimes. Now, if you read the PSA guarantee, it's very well worded, clever. It's not applicable to the original submitter. The original submitter should look and see, is this correctly graded? If it's not, deal with it right then. But once it's sold to another person who's not related to the original submitter, and that person then had a bad deal, and I can just tell you, with BGS, we had lots of attempts to scam us with mistakes we did not make, bogus claims to try to, not extort, but just try to beat the system. And we had to have safeguards, and we had our own version of a guarantee. It wasn't as tightly written as what PSA has done, but there are people out there that try to game any system. reading the PSA guarantee. I'd never really read it in full. And when I did, I said, this is well done. On the other hand, I just had a conversation with somebody peeved at PSA. They'd given them an upcharge. PSA, on one hand, should be conservative on the upcharges. Unless it's well over the next threshold, they ought to give them a pass, I think, just for PR. On the other hand, that goes against what I'm saying, is that the upcharge itself is something that's inculcating the fact that PSA sells for higher and is worth more. So why would they want to be conservative about secondary market values when you got a greater than expected grade? They want you to be celebrating it, and they want you to know, hey, you had to pay extra, but you're going to get the money out of it. Otherwise, they couldn't pull it off. On the other hand, when they're honoring their guarantee, I bet they're not as liberal in the market valuation when they're paying out. But again, that's their prerogative. They should do what they say they're going to do. And it might be that every case is different. If there are no comps, that's potentially a problem. If there's lots of comps, probably you can hold them to that. I don't buy the argument that's the poor submitter that has to go into debt to pay the upcharge. Most of the upcharges are 10% or less, I think, of this additional value. Again, why would you send it back unless you felt like the value was way out of line? Another criticism is that 70s and 80s commons in low grade or high grade, I think that stuff pays PSA's rent. But critics of PSA want them to don't take cheap cards. The cheap cards they're taking are not always cheap after they get graded, if they're in the registry and have a high grade, or there may be some emotional connection. I never wanted to be in the grading business of telling people what they couldn't grade. I said, here's the price. You decide if you want to grade it. On the other hand, I wonder if they're upcharging equally aggressively on commons. If somebody gets a 77 tops common that is a PSA 10, that they get dinged with the upcharge. My guess is they probably do, because they've added additional value there. We thought when we were starting that having a more substantial, stronger slab with an inner sleeve, we thought the subgrades and that we were more transparent. It really didn't matter that much. They liked the fact that PSA's slab is smaller and lighter. And Nat Turner's collector's motto is, I think, his roadmap. He wants to inspire the world to collect by making it safe, easy, and fun. I think job one for them is making it safe. I've said before, easy is what investors want. They don't want any friction. Easy is a vault. Easy is direct to eBay. Frankly, I go to the dollar boxes because it's not easy. BGS was started by a card collector. That's me. PSA was started by a coin guy. A completely different mindset. I also want collecting to be safe, and I want it to be fun. But the easy part, I don't want it to be too hard, but I don't want it to be too easy either. I did an episode, the FCG grading episode, the front and center grading, back in episode 223, where I talked about eye appeal and how you can quickly determine the grade of a card. Was that a threat to PSA? No. I don't even think eye appeal is a threat to PSA. There's two threats to PSA that are existential, and they really affect PSA more than anybody because of their market share, but they affect every grading company. One is the superior quality control of new cards. If 90% of them are 10s, you're not going to need to slab them, or you're not going to have a third party tell you that it's authentic and that it's gem mint. The other thing is if completing sets falls further out of favor, then I think that's a lot of the extra grading that comes in is cards that are really not worth grading, but they're grading because they want to get a complete set or they want to get something that's an emotional connection. Another criticism that I've moderated, it used to bother me that I thought, gee, when people cross over BGS to try to get the same or better grade, but a BGS 9.5 to cross that over to get a PSA 10, which should be an equivalent grade, I think PSA has been harsh on that. I think they do not give the benefit of the doubt, certainly not the benefit of the doubt of the card when it's in the slab. I used to think that doesn't seem right, but I'm not sure I would do it that much different. They're going to be conservative. If they get a card that's graded, they're going to look at it with scrutiny. Why are they crossing this over? PSA, again, part of their brand promise now implicitly is that they're the toughest graders, that they get the highest secondary market prices, and that they're so good they can upcharge you if you bring them a really expensive card and it grades well. So it used to bug me, and now I'm thinking that's just part of their strategy. They're never going to admit they're biased. Any holder that is not their own, they're going to look at it with scrutiny and look for mistakes, because again, it's not a myth, it's a reputation. PSA has set the standard for strictness. They want to be the strictest and they want to sell for more. And that is the case right now And that's my defense of PSA. They're doing an awful lot of things right. And I'm not jealous because we did a lot of things right. And I had a great run, and BGS is coming back now, but PSA has a big lead, and it's not by accident. They are not lucky. They've worked hard to really promote their brand. I'm just saying, the upcharge is part of their strategy. And the more you complain about it, the more it's telling people this is the #1 grading company. So I never wanted PSA to do worse. I just want BGS to do better. That's my business philosophy. Anyway, enough of defending PSA. They're doing quite fine without my defense. So thanks, everybody, and I'll be back again with another episode soon.